Hello, guys. Welcome back. This is episode 7 of the Existential Lounge. Um, Today's topic is a interesting one. Such a fundamental part of building a society is establishing its moral compass. It establishes what's good, what's bad, what are we allowed to do as a society, what's going to be acceptable in the town square of public opinion. All of these type of things are so fundamental to how a society is ran. And the issue with morality is that historically we have been pulling it from different places, and it's left us with a disjointed sense of morality across the world. And that idea is explored in philosophy through something called moral relativism. So it's the idea that, to put it in simple terms, morality is relative to the certain locations, the certain cultures, the people, what they believe is right, what they believe isn't right,
Yeah.
and what they're going to accept in their society. And today we want to go into how we think morality should work, exploring the ideas of moral relativism and what we find best moving forward.
Yeah, and this is such an important topic because morality determines the trajectory of an entire
Yeah, 100%.
people, from the ways in which they engage in science or socially, politically, as you
Hmm.
were saying, the way technology advances, the way that our culture
It dictates
dynamics
what
just
happens in households. It dictates what
yeah,
happens at a legislative level. All of these things are completely predicated on what that society finds to be good, what it
yeah,
finds to be bad, what it finds to be acceptable, what it finds to be not acceptable.
yeah.
It's
Even on an individual level too,
Yeah,
like how do you operate in your daily life? Do you
right.
help that person across the street that needs it, or whatever it may be?
Right. Do we have like the super personal gain sense of morality where everybody's out for themselves? Do we have a utilitarian sense of morality where you do what's best for society? Do we
Mhm.
have a like neighborhood bond sense of morality where it's certain cliques of different areas? All of
Yeah,
these things is just morality exists on such a huge scope that I think it's important to almost find a basis that we can all operate under.
absolutely, especially because in today's world we are more unified now than ever.
Right. Yeah. The world has morality at a cultural level worked best previously because there were less people, meaning civilizations were further apart from each other.
Yeah,
The morality of the Incas and the Aztecs didn't have to do anything with the morality of the Romans or of the people over in East Asia.
yeah.
All of these moralities can exist independent of each other because the only intermingling that would happen, at least between the Romans and the Eastern Asians, would be during the Silk Road trades, and that was just a transactional thing. There was no cultural
Yeah, now we
exchange.
have technology and news, and I can go contact someone in Russia right now and hear about
Exactly,
how they're
right.
living
Like
in.
I can be as connected as I am to a family member in New York that I am to random person in a chat room in
Yeah,
Mongolia.
yeah. Which is amazing.
Yeah, it's
It's super
amazing.
epic.
But now that we have become this hyper connected,
Yeah.
it's important to find a base level morality that we can all operate under in order for everything to develop at a most optimal level.
For sure. And I think the place where we believe we can most optimally derive these moral values is
Mhm.
through science and how
Yes,
good.
but I think before we get into that, I think we should talk about the different scopes. So, like morality itself, what is it?
Yeah. I think our conception of what's right and wrong, what should we do
Right.
versus not do.
So, I think the super important thing to touch on there is that you
Yeah.
started with our. So, morality doesn't exist independent of an observer. Morality
Yeah.
doesn't exist independent of some conscious being looking at something and saying, what is best for this,
Yeah.
right? So, this is a good place, I think, to introduce this idea that you and I have had throughout the years of there are things that exist at a macro universal level, and there's things that exist within something we call the human scope of understanding.
Yeah.
So there's the big picture thing, universe. So we're talking outside of Earth, outside of our Milky Way, everything, every single star system that exists, all encompassed within the universal level. At this level, nothing has morality.
Yeah.
Nothing is okay. Nothing is bad. Nothing is good. Drinking clean water isn't good because good is predicated on the thing drinking the water wanting to survive, and the universe doesn't have a end goal of said organism surviving, right?
Yeah. It's just moving parts like dominoes
Yeah,
falling and
ordered chaos.
yeah, essentially. And so it, unless there is an observer or an organism that has a motive in mind, right? Like I drink water because I value my health, but like the universe isn't valuing anything. It's kind of just
Exactly.
moving in accordance with these random laws that happen to
So
exist, and everything's following in accordance with that.
right. So I think that's the first baseline that we have to set before we start getting into morality, is that at a universal level, nothing has intrinsic morality.
Yeah,
Morality is an attributed factor.
yeah,
So now that we've established that, we move on to the next part. This whole conversation today will be happening within what we just called the human scope of understanding.
yeah,
So within the human scope, how can we derive morality? Now, in order to do that, we have to establish what is our goal.
yeah.
So,
Well-being.
what is well-being?
Yeah. So I think that obviously that's like a huge can of
Right.
worms. A lot of subjectivity, a lot of objectivity. I think there too. So I think that a way that we could look at that is mental well-being, right? Our the degree in which we are free of depression, anxiety, PTSDs, things of that nature. And I think that a lot of the ways in which we live, right, within a moral landscape, many parts of the world, based off of how their cultures are constructed, can be very non-conducive to mental health. I think another element to well-being is physical well-being, right? Like how are our bodies, um, and are we healthy? Are we free of disease and things that hinder our ability to live a pain-free kind of life?
Right.
I think a lot of physical ailments hinder people's ability to live the life that they want to live, right? So I think that for me, I think an easy way to approach the conversation is: are we are we more able to approach the type of life that we want to live without being hindered by mental disabilities or mental ailments, and physical ones, so that we could become the best versions of ourselves? I
Right.
think the fewer things that are kind of on us like weights and holding us back from what we want to accomplish, the fewer things of that nature that exist, the more likely we are to live and flourish and be happy and achieve peace.
Right. I think a good way to encompass all of what you just said is a quote that both of us really enjoy. Um, it's by Fred Rogers, the guy who used to host that talk show back in, like, I think it was like 70s up to like the like 90s.
Mm,
He said, "As human beings, our job in life is to help people realize how rare and valuable each one of us really is. That each of us has something that no one else has or ever will have, something inside that is unique to all of time. It's our job to encourage each other to discover this uniqueness and to provide ways to develop its expression."
exactly.
I think that is what at least you and I would want to define human betterment as:
Yeah,
creating a environment, a society that pushes and nurtures that development of that uniqueness in each
exactly.
individual. So, what when approaching any moral conundrum, we want to look at it as how can we approach this best in order to reach that end goal of
Yeah.
optimal human expression of their uniqueness.
Yeah. I think each person has tons of different unique skill sets and so many ways in which they want to express themselves openly. And I think that creating societies that are conducive towards that end is
Hmm.
should be our biggest goal.
Right.
What else is there in life beyond trying to achieve the best versions of
Yeah, I think there's a
ourselves?
lot of like facade and stuff out there that blinds us or just guides us away from that. But
Yeah.
that at its core is what humanity wants. That's what we want. We
Yeah.
want everyone to be that optimal version of themselves, to find the thing that they have that is unique to all of time,
Yeah.
that and help feed that, help develop that to its greatest degree. And so today we're going to look into how we can navigate morality in order to facilitate a society that does that best.
Yeah. I guess that's where we bring in the science, where
Exactly. Yeah.
um, such in the same way as how clean water nurtures you, right? Like you can't live without it. There are or healthy food, a balanced diet. Um, that there are elements inherent to our makeup as beings that have requirements. We need
Right.
certain things in certain ways to achieve certain outcomes.
Right.
And so we can look to science based off of our understanding of psychology, based off of our understanding of anatomy. For instance, if I ate Doritos every day, right? That we would recognize that that's going to create a lot of anatomical hindrances on who I could be and what I could do. My mental health is going to go down because I'm not getting nutrients. My hormones are going to be out of whack because the necessary nutrients from that as well is going to impact my biochemistry. Um, and I'm also going to gain weight. I'm not going to be able to move in the ways that I want to. And so we can recognize that there is a spectrum of well-being, right? And so there, just in the same way as I use like eating chips, Doritos as an example, there's other bad things that I could constantly eat that would also equate to a equally as bad state of being.
Right.
And so we have to recognize that there is also, just such in the same way as that there is a bad side of the spectrum, there is a good side. I eat balanced diets of proteins and vegetables, right, for all of my meals. That's going to be on the good side. And that there is no one way, one particular meal that I could eat that is going to give me those good benefits, right? There's many different ways. But we have to develop a clear perspective of this spectrum so that we can recognize when we're going more to one side or the other in order to achieve well-being and optimization.
I think things that are a hard science, such as our biological well-being, those are more easy to navigate through when saying, oh, we should derive the morality of that through science, because there's a hard science behind it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's easier for most people to swallow that pill of, yeah, I mean, there's biologists who understand how certain things react in our body when we eat these in excess, when we eat these in excess, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that's a much more easy pill for people to swallow. The issue arises when we're talking about more complex, nuanced situations where we need to apply morality. And how do we do that? How do we do that through science where everybody can come to a consensus of, yeah, that makes the most sense?
Yeah. So I think a really good example of that is reprimanding children through physical violence. I think that this is a very, very common practice, and it has been throughout so much of time. And when we look at studies of kids that have been physically reprimanded, right? They develop PTSD, they develop social anxiety, they develop depression, they can have trust issues,
right?
Fear, all sorts of different things like that. Now let's isolate those things. All of those things, like PTSD, for instance, that hinders a lot of people in many different ways.
Yeah.
Exactly. All of those things that I just stated are things that we don't value. If we look at the way in which they affect us, they exist as nothing but hindrances to who we can be and what we can be. They cause us pain and anguish, and they don't serve us. And so if you look at the opposing sort of approach, which is gentle guidance and using language and speaking with respect to our children, that those yield much more positive effects. It actually helps to have the child speak with more understanding about a situation, rather than you beat me and I understand this through fear. It's like, no, let's sit down and talk about why this is bad. And that creates a deeper trust and understanding, and that increases the child's ability to speak to other people that way. I mean, if you just get beat every time you do something wrong,
your communication skills won't be there.
Yeah, and that's going to affect the way that you're going to go communicate with your friends, right? You're going to resort to violence and things of that nature.
Exactly.
And it makes people more violent. And so if those are things that we don't value, right, then it seems that isn't on the spectrum of the good, because this has so many elements that we just don't like. And so I think many people could say, well, you know what, I was beaten, I turned out great. I think that's a very common argument for things that seem negative. And
plenty of soldiers from World War II came back fine.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that what they experienced was a net good.
Exactly. And so we have to look at the majority and not exceptions to this rule, that where it just doesn't yield positive results,
Right.
and that there's more optimal ways to go about it. And if there's more optimal ways to go about it, and we recognize the optimization through psychological outcomes, right, healthier communication styles, lessen degrees of mental illness, etc., seems we should move in a different direction.
So I want to just look at the big picture there of what exactly you just did, which is what we were saying we should be doing with every topic. You identified the moral conundrum.
Yes.
Discipline of children.
Yeah.
We then looked at, how do we want the outcome of this to look? what outcome will best work for the betterment of humanity in the sense that we explained earlier.
Yeah.
We looked at the current practice of physical punishment for things that are bad. And we saw how that leads down a path that does not um, offer a solution to that original case that we made, right? So, what is best for human betterment? We want adults that are able to communicate, adults that don't have this trauma, adults that can problem solve and sit down. All these things are hindered by physical punishment. So that lets us see how can we handle this moral conundrum. We should speak to them. So that's the process that we've got to be taking with all of these moral conundrums: is identify problem, what is the outcome we want, and then what actions will best lead to that outcome.
Yeah, entirely.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find situations where we can't apply our understanding of science in order to come to these conclusions.
Right.
It right, if science is to understand how our mind works, our mind is a byproduct of hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary development,
Yes.
right? So we have this hardware that works in certain ways, these zero and ones, just programming that's just a part of who we are. As I was saying earlier, you drink water, everyone has to drink water, there's no exceptions, right?
Yeah.
We have to learn how to navigate in accordance with the way in which we are just wired. So in the same way, I brought up the whole eating Doritos thing earlier. If you have someone that just stays inside all day and isn't challenging themselves and doesn't have hobbies or friends, and they just play video games all day and eat junk food, we can recognize that more often than not, that person's going to wind up miserable. They're not getting, for instance, the necessary vitamin D from sunlight, which interacts with our brain in such a way that helps to stave off depression and helps with our hormonal regulation. They're not going to the social interactions where we have, since the dawn of humanity, have interacted in groups and villages and just collective communities where we're striving for a particular goal, or they're outside like challenging themselves. We need movement. We need movement. If you say you don't, you're just wrong about it. We need movement in the way that we are just naturally constructed to be. And so science helps to understand these necessities of what we need in order to strive. And
Right.
we have those answers through science.
So, just for the sake of some devil's advocate here, when we're looking at that issue of raising kids and how discipline should go with them, and you're saying we should sit down and speak with them about these issues, there's a threshold of development in the human brain where that is an ability, like where we can actually sit down. Like, if a 3-year-old is tossing his crayons everywhere, right? I'm not going to sit down and have a conversation with a 3-year-old.
For sure.
So, how do we do that? How do we navigate that?
I think it depends on the circumstance. I think it depends on age, what the kid is doing, but I think that there are certain things that are non-negotiably wrong, like smacking my 3-year-old across the face, or grabbing a ruler and hitting them, whatever it may be, throwing them like I don't know, into something.
Right.
Like, that's always going to be wrong. I think that if we look to child development psychology and people that work with these kids, and they come to conclusions about the science of child rearing, right? What is optimized? What helps them to understand and do things better? So I think that, like, I'm not an expert in that field, but there's definitely ways of speaking sternly that definitely works, or forms of timeout, or I think that sometimes removing a kid from the situation can be really good, right? If they're crying over they made a mess or they hurt themselves or whatever, I feel like oftentimes, like, in the same way, it's hard for our brain to be upset about something. Like, if you have depression, right, and you find it within yourself to, like, go for a run or go for a walk, it's hard to constantly feel something negative when you distract your brain with something different. 100%. And so I think something really useful is just, like, if a kid's having a problem or something, remove them from the situation, as insofar as they're maybe not old enough to understand
Yeah.
through like actual discourse. Hey, you can't speak to a 3 or 2 year old and like have
Right.
conversation. It's complex. Why is this wrong or whatever? And understanding.
Exactly.
Take them for a walk. Take them outside and show them leaves, or an animal. Have them, pet a cat or something of that
Yeah.
nature. I think that when they get to the age of actual understanding, when you can have discourse, that opens a different door for um, uh, reprimanding,
Right.
in a different way.
So regardless, the point here still stands that there are other ways as opposed to that physical punishment that helps this in a more conducive way to human betterment.
Yeah. So, like, 100%. It's just, I think that hitting is an extreme punishment that may seem to work in the short term,
Hmm.
but in the long term, you can't negate that. You can't negate the negative ways in which that affects people in the long term. And I think that people look at that instant gratification and they go, it works. He shut up. I hit him. Like, I yelled at the top of my lungs, this kid, and this kid's so afraid. He shut his mouth and he's just in his bed, like shaking.
Yes.
That's short term and it works. And they see it works. And that reinforces the idea that we should just keep perpetuating
Exactly.
this. We do this over time and it works, but we cannot lose sight of long term. And sometimes that long term, it may take extra work. It's harder to sit down with your child and speak to them. It's harder to take them for a walk rather than just shout at the top of your lungs. And so sometimes we have to take the
Now,
harder path.
I think that opens a door to a topic that I am very adamant about. That it's a topic that I think a lot of people may disagree with, but I think what you just outlined with reprimanding children applies exactly the same, and that's the criminal justice system.
Mm.
So we're looking at what offers instant gratification in the same way that physical reprimanding or yelling does. It's sending people to jail, right? So they've done something bad, we send them to jail. We have these ridiculously long sentences. We have poor conditions in jails, all these things that in the end don't work, as we see through all the numbers when we see that recidivism rates for people who've been incarcerated for these things is ridiculously high.
100%.
That doesn't work towards human betterment.
Yeah.
Putting people in jail doesn't work towards human betterment. So let's look at the problem, assess it, and how can we switch this to better help the development of humans.
100%.
So that is a more rehabilitative approach to criminal justice. It's identifying the root problem of what has caused criminality, address that problem in the psyche of the individual who has committed it, and then help them reintegrate into society in a way that they are now conducive to society,
Yeah.
conducive to that, again, overall human betterment.
Yeah, and also, within a political framework, work towards pushing policies that help to reduce the issues that created poverty in this whole community in the first
Exactly.
place.
Yeah.
That made it difficult for that person to put food on the table for their like 2 kids and put them into a good school that isn't entirely underfunded and has no materials and the teachers are underqualified.
100%.
Um, when we look towards fixing actual solutions, it's the harder route. But yeah, like jail's a easy, like, okay, cool, they're off the streets, they're no longer a threat.
It offers that same instant gratification to the family of the victim that it does, that physical reprimandation to children does to the adult.
Yeah.
It's that instant gratification, but did that actually do anything?
Yeah.
How many of us are stopping and saying, did that instant gratification, is that worth the net bad that it's causing society?
Yeah, I think a lot of people operate in those moments. I'd say almost 10 out of 10 times, the person that yells at their kid, you're operating almost exclusively emotionally here.
100%. And I
Like,
think that it's also true that most of them, when that emotion dies down, they realize that what they did was wrong.
yeah,
Now, to have the emotional capacity to apologize to your child, that's something that a lot of parents don't have.
for sure.
But
I think there's an entitlement there.
Yeah.
Why am I apologizing to you? I'm the parent.
Right.
I say what's right here.
Right.
I'm the, iron fist.
But regardless, I think that inside there's still that regret to what just happened, because we all instinctively know that what just transpired was not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that there's such a responsibility on parents to never yell at your kid. I think there's a difference. The kid's running out into the street. Sometimes you got to make your voice
Yeah,
heard. You have
100%.
but screaming at your kid,
in a, in a
raising your
in a
voice.
combative, like
Yeah,
demeaning way. That's where it's just not necessary. You're
yeah,
never doing anything good for the kid there. And I forget what I was recently watching, but there was a father who was talking to his daughter, and he said, "My goal is to make sure that you can exist in the best way once I'm no longer here."
yeah,
And that's the end goal of parenthood. You want to do the best you can to ready this other person to exist in the most optimal way when you're no
yeah,
longer there to guide anymore.
yeah.
And that's how we've got to look at all these situations. Is me yelling, is that going to help him or her exist in the best way possible once they're no longer here?
Yeah, I think imagine your kid now taking what you did. Do you want them yelling
Right.
at other people to solve a problem? Does that seem like yelling? I mean, how many issues are resolved through yelling?
Yeah, none
Right.
really. None.
Yeah,
We just get into a screaming match, and no solution has ever been come to, just two people trying to speak over each other.
exactly. Yeah, it's just important because you stop hearing words, you stop hearing the logic behind anything that someone says, the sense in it, and you just start hearing emotion. It's just
Exactly.
the audible manifestation of just emotion just going like this. And
Hmm.
yeah, I see that you're mad. I didn't even have to like hear all that, like your posture and all of this stuff, but it's so important to make our words heard and the sense behind it, and that's what's going to develop deep understanding. So I think that like that's such an issue where kids have a poor relationship in relation to what's right and wrong, not with, they don't have a foundation of logic that
Right.
makes them understand, yeah, this is wrong because of this and this. Like, no, this is wrong because my parents get pissed at me and they yell or they'll hit me, and so I got to not do that thing. That creates such a myopic perspective of life and
Hmm.
right and wrong,
Right.
because on one hand, you have a full breakdown of logic. You have this is wrong because the effects it has on other people, on the way in which the world is viewed, because I'm destructive, because whatever it may be. The other hand is equals, I get hit and bad, and like I get yelled at. Oh no, like
Yeah.
that's awful. It results in a lot less thought process too, which I think is also
Yeah, super
not good.
detrimental to society. I think that it's maybe maybe not the only factor here, but I'm sure it plays a role, is look at the state of political discourse in Congress. We don't see people sit down and discuss ideas and break down the logic behind them and which way we should go in regard to what legislation should be passed, what legislation should be introduced, et cetera, et cetera. They just sit there and yell at each other from talking points because at a fundamental level they don't know how to communicate and look at an idea independent of themselves and solely um, break it down by just hurling logic at it as much as you can.
Yeah.
No, they sit there, they've come to the table with the preconceived notion of what their truth is, and their idea is, I'm here at this table to defend my truth, not to come to the truth.
Yeah. I think another form of a pacifying a difficult situation, especially in modern day, and everyone has recognized iPad kids, right?
100%.
You
Yeah.
know, and it's such an easy way to have your kid not get into trouble. They're not getting into trouble. They're not doing anything, or you're yelling or anything, because their mind is pacified with bright visual colors and cute
Coco
voices that are,
Melon.
yeah, that are just kind of like grabbing children's. They're just designed so scientifically to a T to just grab the attention of children.
Right.
It is a whole just like science of how can I grab this kid's attention and keep it for as long as possible.
Right. And
And it's harder to not have the iPad and have the kid looking, and that you have to speak to them or that you have to like coax them. They but you have to look also, they're understanding social dynamics, they're paying attention, they hear your voice, they see the way you treat other people, they're understanding social cues and language, and seeing the world. And the world isn't some animated picture cartoon,
right.
and that's so important. That's so beyond anything. It is unprecedented. There's never been a time in human history where developing children are placed in front of something before they can think with language.
Before they can walk, before
Yeah,
they can.
and just be pacified with imagery and things that are are totally separate from life,
Right,
totally separate
exactly.
from looking at the ceiling to like the material on a blanket, whatever it may be. No, it's these characters that you don't even know what they're saying to the kids. Like you don't even know what's happening.
So yeah, I think that the problem there again is the same issue we were getting to at the beginning is we've identified a problem. What is the problem? It's that parents, because of a plethora of things, right? Just jobs have been getting harder, taking care of a household is getting harder, sustaining a household is much more expensive while wages aren't as good as they were. So the problem is that they're so preoccupied with all these other things that they need to keep this household running that paying attention to their kid 24/7 is not only not optimal but just not possible.
People
It's
don't even need babysitters anymore.
no, you just give your kid a tablet and he's sitting there brain dead for hours.
It sounds insanely dystopic. And look, to clarify, we both agree that there's a lot of information out there in moderation. There's a lot of educational stuff out there for kids. There really is. There's stuff that like would be watching some nature channel or whatever it may be. Some of these shows I'm sure have a lot of positive benefit, but it's being used in excess as a it shouldn't be used as a pacifier. It should be
Right.
used as a little buffer for like whatever it may be to like
Entertainment,
yeah,
like
entertainment,
it's
which
fine
is
for
healthy.
yeah, your outlets of just fun, and everything doesn't need to be this like great quest for like learning and knowledge. Like
Yeah,
that's just not realistic.
for
Kids are going
sure.
to be kids. Kids want to have fun. Kids
Yeah,
want to turn off their brains. It's
yeah,
normal. So yeah, but when we see that, wake up in the morning, you're making breakfast and your kid needs to sit down, so give him the tablet and he can watch some YouTube. We need to go do some groceries. He's yelling and crying on the shopping cart. Give him the tablet.
yeah.
We get home. I got to cook dinner now. Give him the tablet while I'm doing that. He finished eating but doesn't want to go to sleep, and I need to sit down and eat. Give him the tablet. It seems that that's just the answer for everything, and that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that we need to work on is awareness, and that's being distracted. I mean, it's being
Yeah,
shortened. Our attention spans are being like cut down to nothing now.
yeah,
I hear stories. I've spoken to a couple people recently that are teachers for like like middle school, and
yeah,
unless the kids are learning with a screen, they are all over the place from what I've heard. And I found that to be insane. Like
yeah.
that's scary to think that these kids are on screens so much that they're not looking at them. They can't focus, that they
100%.
are they're uncomfortable. And it makes sense because a lot their brains are associating screens with pleasure. There's so
Yeah.
much of that short-term instant gratification when utilizing these devices that we're creating such a dependency, and we're creating this dependency on our kids. I mean, look, we're in our mid 20s and we feel the experience of what it's like to grow in a technologically dependent society, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah, I'm doing nothing. I'm standing in line at a place. I might pull out my phone automatically, or in the bathroom, pull out my phone. But
Yeah.
this is different because we didn't grow up like that.
We weren't born into this. Yeah.
People being born into this, I can't
This is the only thing
conceptualize
you
it.
ever knew. Like this is the
Yeah.
world that you
Mm-mm.
existed in from the jump.
The changes that are going to come from that,
Yeah. I think we're already seeing them. We touched
we
on
are.
it
We
last
are.
episode with masculinity of the inability for young men to communicate
Yeah.
because they've been pacified by these type of things. But I feel like we're gearing a little away from what we were meaning to talk to here.
It's true. It's true.
In essence, is we're looking at that issue and applying the logic of what is best for humanity. Do we want these pacified children that are going to grow into adults that can't hold conversation, that can't keep attention span on one thing for more than a few minutes? No, that's not what's best for humanity, for that betterment of humanity that we spoke about.
Correct.
So we can see that in the moral conundrum of, do I give my kid the tablet, we can break that down using logic instead of other things, which brings us to our next point, which I think might be the most controversial, is where has humanity historically derived morality from?
Yeah. Religion.
Religion.
And a lot of these ideas are inherently dogmatic, where we can't question it
Yeah,
necessarily.
and I think
It's
that's the
written in
biggest
stone.
problem, right?
No pun intended. I mean, literally.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem here, is that if we derive our sense of morality from an idea that isn't allowed to be questioned, it leads to a stagnant society, a society that's going to have division regardless of the advancements in our understanding of human nature, because a long time ago this was written that this is how we're supposed to think about these certain things. That it's it's and I don't mean this in an offensive way, but that's dangerously ignorant.
Yeah.
It's dangerous to exist in a world where our sense of morality cannot be questioned.
The only way that we can continue moving forward is through the questioning, through the morals that exist right now and that are applicable right now, that are useful right now.
Mm.
Probably, I mean, if you were to picture humans on an infinite timeline, that if we imagine 1,000 years from now, it's going to be a lot different. The way that we need to interact is going to change
Yeah.
based off of like the way that the world exists, the way the technology exists, whatever it may be. I mean, we're going to be space age beings, and that's going to require a whole written thing
Yeah.
about laws regarding space ethics,
Yeah.
like how to conduct yourself and how to
Yeah, I
whatever it may
promise
be.
you that we're not going to get into the validity of religion, but God or Moses or whoever was writing a specific verse in the Bible had no idea about space.
Exactly.
Had no idea of how we would function, or the idea of like the way the atmosphere interacts with the stare as opposed to here. We're going to need to come up with a completely new sense of how right and wrong is. The further and further let Elon have his way, we're going to be interplanetary within the next few decades.
Yeah.
That's just opens this door that, again, not wanting to sound mean or anyway, but it kind of just leaves religion in the dust.
Yeah.
We're moving to a world where religion, it's an antiquated way of worldview.
I mean, yeah, we see uh, atheism statistics. It's on the rise.
Yeah.
I think that the more our science progresses, the more people are skewing away from religion,
Yeah.
because it's losing a place. When so many of our answers that were at one point in time not answered, it becomes harder to keep pushing these ideas into it. I think a lot of people also have a negative relationship with religion, where these dogmatic perspectives, you can't question it, and instilling fear into people. Again, this kind of goes back to, if I'm to teach my kid right and wrong through instilling fear, that like, if you
Right.
don't go to bed on time,
Yeah,
you don't
no,
go
I
to bed
think
on
that's a
time.
great parallel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't go to bed on time, that monster under your bed is gonna like eat your feet off. I don't
Yeah.
know, whatever. Like, that's not a healthy relationship with understanding why should I go to bed
Right.
early. You know?
Likewise, yeah, the Bible may say, like, be nice to your neighbor, don't kill people,
Mm-hmm.
don't um, go out and commit some heinous crime, but it's not explaining why that's bad for society. It's
Yeah.
not explaining why we should do these things. It's just saying you should do them or you burn.
Yeah.
And it's that same way that a parent is parenting a child through fear, like you said, of don't do that or I'm going to go get the belt. Don't whatever, or the monster under your bed or the monster in the closet.
Yeah.
It's you're preying on the ignorance of someone and having them bend to your will through fear.
Yeah. And it's easy. It's
Yeah.
easy to just say there's a monster rather than explain,
Why?
yeah,
Yeah.
why to go to bed. And I think, to play devil's advocate, it makes sense to a degree, because the explanation is a lot more difficult for a kid to value,
Yeah.
right? Like, you need your health and all that. Kid, what is it? What does a single digit human know about health and like what
Right.
these things mean and represent? No, but like a big motivator is, there's a monster on it. A kid with a lot of imagination, kids have a ton of
Yeah. No matter
imagination.
what, we have that natural instinct to fear
Yeah.
danger.
Yeah,
So
and that's a big motivator, big motivator. So yeah, I mean, if I were a kid and told there's a monster under my bed, if I don't go to like at a certain time, I'm gonna be
I'm
in
gonna
that
be in
bed.
bed.
Yeah, no questions.
Exactly.
Um,
I think that that dogmatic approach to morality is also attractive to a lot of people because, and again, I don't mean this in an insulting way, I don't think a lot of people have been raised where they were exposed to the factors that help them develop the ability to have that logical conversation for every single thing.
yeah, I think a big factor here is like, lots of families where person tells their kid to do something, kid asks why. Don't question me. Like, it's almost like, I don't know. They've been maybe conditioned through that dogmatism that like they translate that into their household too.
Where the authority, the head of the household, God for
Yeah,
everyone.
if my kid asked me why, I'd be like, let's sit down and I'll answer
Right.
your question.
I want that. I want that.
Yeah,
I smile because I just had like a little premonition almost of like the first time my kid asked me why. I'm just gonna be so proud.
yeah. I think that's indicative of intelligence and of curiosity, and we should welcome
Oh,
that.
that curiosity that seems to be in every single one of us when we're a kid, but this
Goes away.
dogmatic approach to reality,
Yeah,
it shuts that away. Religion is telling you not to question the world. Your dad or your mom's telling you not to question their rules. The school's telling you not to question their approach to education. Um, everything's telling you no, you're not allowed to question. This is the way that things are. And
yeah,
that just approach to close-minded, that approach to making everyone ignorant is just something that really gets to me.
yeah. And through that, to wrap around back to our original points, is the effects that has is not beneficial. We
It's
have
not.
people that are less capable of thinking abstractly and critically and being fearless, having the courage to like ask these questions, because your entire life you were head down, follow the rules, don't ask questions,
Right.
go with the flow of the whatever. And that's, we need free thinkers. We need people that are fearless and able to question things, because it's only through questioning, like, is there a better, I don't know, like, could there be a better form of transportation than like tires, for instance? Like,
Yeah.
let's reinvent the wheel. You know, it's almost like we're conditioned to be afraid to do these things. And
Right.
in getting over that fear, can we progress? We can. The only time we've ever progressed in society is through those people that were unafraid to question things.
Right.
Galileo being like, you know what, maybe the universe doesn't revolve around us. You know, and
And what's interesting about the specific example you bring up is who was the one telling him not to do that.
yeah, I think that he was, yeah, attacked for that, um, by the church, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Him,
it's telling.
Copernicus, all the thinkers of that time
Yeah.
that were trying to break the status quo, it was the church telling them we can't break the status quo because a system that controls individuals by policing thought, their number one weapon is the status quo.
Yeah.
It's we need to maintain that at all costs because the second that we have people who think for themselves, we lose our control.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess we're kind of like diving deep into that at this point. I think that the future of humanity is moving away from religion. It's finding our
We're
morality.
statistically moving in that direction
Yeah,
already.
we need to our morality is going to be derived through science, through
Yeah.
logical thinking. And once we kind of move on board with that and the majority of people are with that, why else are we hanging on to religion at that point?
Yeah.
Because right now we still have a lot of people who derive their morality from that. But the more that we move away from that, the more that we, like I said, start looking at things and developing moral compasses through logical thinking, religion is losing more and more of its value.
Yeah. I've always had this thought in my head where I just can't picture interstellar looking humans on spaceships and stuff carrying around Bibles and like having temples in there.
Yeah,
I just can't picture that. And you know, I don't think that there's anything that, you know, religion can do for us that philosophy can't, or that science
yeah.
can't. You
I
know,
think that religion had its value. It
it did.
definitely did. To sit here and be the atheist that's like humanity would be better off if religion never existed is to be um,
Ignorant to how it
ignorant.
served us
Yeah,
at the times in which it did.
it did, and it 100% did. I mean, in a world where education wasn't a thing that was widespread, and most people never went to school, most people didn't were illiterate, most people didn't know how to read or write. It's easier to teach people like that to follow social norms and social rules through fear. It just
Yeah.
makes sense. It makes sense to do that, and without that um, hard hand of discipline that religion gave humanity back then, we likely would have just killed all of it. Like we would have
Yeah.
killed each other, and none of
I
these
think
things would have
that
developed.
back to the whole parent thing with easy solutions, I think that religion serves as a very easy solution for, it's been proven that internal law is more powerful than external law, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fear of police or whatever isn't as strong as the fear of God watching you, or the
Yeah,
fact that you're sinning right now. That's more powerful. It's been proven to be more powerful. And so it's
I've
it
been told that by people actually, like in specific, like believers. When I ask why, they say it keeps me from doing bad things.
mhm,
Some of them won't even argue the like validity of the claims of it. They're just saying the teachings of it keep me from being a worse person than what I am.
yeah. Religion checks off the boxes of the deepest human needs, right?
Yeah,
Community, existential purpose,
yeah,
right? Not being alone, right? There's some being that like is there
and
for you.
the biological fear we have of coming to an end.
Yeah, completely. The existential fears. Um, Tradition, people Christmas is here again, and Christmas has always been a thing we see, and so normalcy is something that like people crave,
Yeah,
and the communities from that, and so
and that
it's
makes
an
sense biologically when you
yeah.
think about it. It's when things aren't regular, when things aren't like they've always been, a hunter gatherer is more likely to die. If the herd of animals that migrate during the winter don't come this winter,
Mm,
we're going to die.
mm-hmm.
If
It's a good
our
that's a good analogy.
crops don't grow every, what is it, spring? I'm sorry, I'm not a big like crop person, but whatever time of the year crops grow, if they don't grow that time of year,
It depends on what kind of crop, because some are like seasonal and all that. Some
for
grow
sure, but
during
I'm pretty sure like
not winter
like
crops.
yeah, like
Fair.
Vikings weren't growing apples in the middle of December.
But yeah, I think it's kind of like a quick band-aid on a lot of issues that we
Yeah,
have. It's harder to think critically. It's harder to like create when you have these communities, it's easier to quickly like speak on these things that are hard to question, these non-falsifiable claims that can't even be analyzed in
yeah,
many ways constructively. So it's easier to just be like, okay, well, the monster's under my bed. I got to go to bed. And it works in the same way.
yeah. It's an easy framework for morality, but easy rarely equals best.
Yeah.
And that's the main crux of the issue here is that does it work? Kind of. Has it worked? Yeah. Will it keep working? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that again, what we've been trying to do is to create a kind of spectrum,
Hmm.
and I would argue that on the spectrum of good and bad, that like it definitely leans towards this direction if you
Yeah.
look at it in relation to other ways in which we can have humans interact using scientific frameworks,
Hmm.
utilizing philosophy and um, frameworks of morality that are always on the table to be questioned, analyzed, critiqued, changed, whatever
Yeah.
it may be. I think that not only just fuels creativity, you know, open thought, healthy discourse
Yeah.
without fear, without all of this. Like people have so much fear with religion because of the thinking bad thoughts or doing things or whatever. Um, that being free of that helps you to just be who you are. We're stifling natural,
That
having
expression of that uniqueness
yeah,
that we
having
spoke about
sexual
earlier.
thoughts is part of like being a human, right?
Yeah.
We literally need that. We
Yeah. Organisms
procreate.
need that in order to
Exactly.
continue the
100%. And so
species.
and to like stifle so many natural things, you are essentially disallowing the organism to
See,
be what it
but
needs to
okay,
be.
the argument there would be that there are 100% values to society to not be as promiscuous as possible, right? But then the counter is science still helps us with that. We could still look at this and say, yes, we all have sexual desires, but within this framework is where we have to operate because outside of that, there's likelihood of spreading disease, likelihood of unwanted children, likelihood of single parent households, likelihood of low income housing,
Yeah,
all of these things, likelihood of older people taking advantage of younger people, all these different things that can exist on the periphery of just saying, well, we have sexual desire, so it's okay to just have them. Yes, but within, again, that scope of understanding when we break down the moral conundrum logically.
definitely. And again, I think Sam Harris words it really well in the moral landscape of how there's these hills and valleys of right and wrong, is that there isn't one set way to do something right. This is
Hmm.
not what we're saying. We're saying that there's again on this spectrum of there are better things and that there are worse things,
Yeah.
and that you know on that spectrum of like sexual expression, for instance, like, yeah, going around and taking advantage of people is super wrong. And that whatever desire that's fueling that needs to be exercised in a healthy way that's respectful to
Yeah,
communities. And if it's not, it becomes dangerous.
when he's talking about that spectrum, I remember a specific example he brings up, which I think is a valid one. He says on the idea of female promiscuity, there's the extreme dogmatic view with Islamic tradition of forcing women to cover themselves entirely, otherwise they're liable to some terrible reprimand, right?
Hmm.
And he says that we can say is objectively wrong. It may be unpopular to say, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend anybody who follows the religion. If a woman chooses to cover herself, absolutely, by all means, do whatever you want. But the idea that you're doing that in fear of consequence,
Yeah,
it's objectively wrong. I'm sorry. Honestly, not even sorry. That's objectively wrong. We
yeah,
can't exist in a world that a group of people can dictate what other people wear and how they present their bodies. Otherwise, terrible consequence come of it.
yeah,
But he also goes ahead and says, since this does exist on a spectrum, I'm not saying the West has it figured out perfectly. And then he shows a magazine where hyper promiscuity seems to have become the standard of the Western world.
yeah.
And is that the best way? Is that what we want to teach our daughters? That hey, you should flaunt yourself to this extreme? That probably isn't the best answer either.
Correct.
So there are extremes there on the spectrum of how we can derive morality.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that one or the other has it right, the Western world or the more traditional world, but we have to attack these moral conundrums with logic and come to the best possible outcome.
Completely. So that's our take on how moral values can be derived through science and logical thinking.
Right.
There's an amazing book by Sam Harris called The Moral Landscape that gave us a lot of insight to us on this situation. I think that so oftentimes it's the case that science and morality can't sit in the same room.
Yeah.
That there's this been like belief throughout
That
all of
science
time.
tells us how things work, but now how we should do things.
Exactly. And how, if you really look at it, it makes sense that it could. That
Yeah.
the deeper understanding that we have of how our minds work and how our bodies work, there's certain approaches that are conducive to the things that we value, that equate to prosperous living, which I
Yeah.
think everyone is
And
just
I
on
think
board with.
when we are able to do this and essentially put to the side silly things that I don't think should even be problems in today's world. Things like I was just touching on with women's rights in certain cultures or the persecution of homosexuality in the LGBTQ community. These things seem so ridiculous that they're even a problem of contention. Like, this shouldn't be something we're even arguing. Let people do as they want. And if we were able to do that, move away from that dogmatic view of morality and put those aside, like, yep, people will do what they want, we can focus our efforts into better developing humanity because we're not wasting time on things that shouldn't even be a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode on the topic being
Failure.
failure.
How do we maneuver that? We're all going to do it. We're going to do it a lot more than we succeed. So
100%.
how
100%.
do we face it?
Yeah.
All right, see you guys on that one.
Bye.
Bye.